Today's webinar reviewing the FY17 solicitation for the Second Chance Act Statewide Adult Recidivism Reduction Program. Throughout the webinar today, we'll refer to this as the SRR Grant Program. My name is Kerwin Henderson, and I'm a policy analyst here with the Council of State Governments Justice Center. Today's webinar is sponsored by the Bureau of Justice Assistance of the Department of Justice in collaboration with the National Reentry Resource Center of the Council of State Governments. To give you some background about the National Reentry Resource Center, it is the nation's primary source of information and guidance in reentry. We deliver training and technical assistance to recipients of Second Chance Act grants in order to maximize their efforts to reduce recidivism and help people succeed in their communities after they return from incarceration. Further, the NRRC works to advance the knowledge base of the reentry field, promote what works in reentry, facilitate peer networks and information exchange, and to provide information for people returning to communities and their families. Before we begin, I have a couple of technical notes. If you encounter any technical difficulties, if you don't encounter any connection or audio problems during the webinar, please call WebEx Technical Support at 1-866-229-3239. We will also put that number in the chat box on your screen. Unfortunately, there are some connection issues we may not be able to resolve. However, today's recording of the webinar will be posted on our website within 2 weeks of today's date. We also have designated time at the end of today's webinar to review questions and answers. At that time, please feel free to type your questions into the Q&A box on your screen. We'll click on the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. Today's webinar is organized into 4 parts. First, we'll provide an overview of the SRR grant program, including its origins and purpose. During the majority of the webinar, we'll discuss the specifics of the application process and solicitation requirements. We'll wrap up with a question and answer session, as I said earlier, at the end. So we'll take a second to introduce today's speakers. First, we have Deanna Hoskins, who's a Senior Policy Advisor at the Bureau of Justice Assistance at DOJ. And we also have Renee Sneed from the Reentry Services Unit Manager of Operations with the Georgia Department of Community Supervision. Andrea Lee, who's a policy analyst here at the Council of State Governments, myself, and present but not listed, we have Mary Heidelheit, who is also here with the Justice Center. Now that we have introduced our panel, we'd like to find out a little bit more about who we have on the line. In the chat function at the bottom of your screen, if you just could please take the time to indicate your type of organization and the state you're representing. We'll go ahead and give you a few minutes to do so now. Keisha, if you want to go ahead and close the poll, in a few minutes we should be able to see the results on the right-hand side of the screen. So it looks like we've got a few people from their state administering agency SAAs, some state community correctional people, and as well as some state correctional agencies, and a number of different states represented. So it's good to see that and welcome everyone to the webinar. So now to give you a little background information on SRR and the grant's objectives. As a Second Chance Act grant, SRR is designed to help policymakers and departments of corrections plan and implement system-wide reform to reduce recidivism. Among the most critical priorities of the SRR program is to institute evidence-based practices and core correctional practices with fidelity across corrections, probation, and parole. States that have received SRR grants utilize the funds to pursue an intensive collaborative process that brings the governor, state policymakers, and corrections leaders together to set measurable recidivism reduction goals and develop practical, data-driven plans to achieve these goals. Unlike some of the other Second Chance Act grants, SRR are designed to be a two-phase process. The first phase is focused on planning and capacity building of the state, and phase 2 is the actual implementation of what was proposed in phase 1. Just to reiterate, the solicitation we are discussing in today's webinar is for the planning phase. Then, once this cohort of states has been awarded planning funds, only those states will have an opportunity to apply for phase 2 of implementation funds. And now I'll hand it over to Andrew Lee to discuss the specific strategy planning objectives of SRR. Andrew.
Thanks, Kerwin. Hi, everybody. So there are 4 strategic planning objectives in phase 1 of the SRR grant. First, identify the drivers of recidivism across the state. So this means looking at all the policies and procedures and programs that may impact recidivism and cause barriers for people reentering the community. Then, use this information to establish a target population, focusing on a broad population of people with disproportionately high rates of recidivism in the state. So armed with this information, your planning team can be focused on deciding what types of interventions and services are needed to lower the state's recidivism rate. Next, review the alignment of these policies and procedures with evidence-based practices and corrections that are proven to reduce recidivism. And then finally, develop a strategic plan that outlines the types of investments that your state will make in order to address these drivers of recidivism and build capacity throughout the state. This map shows the current FY14 and FY16 SRR grantees who are all in phase 2, or the implementation phase. States across the country are struggling to decrease their prison population and reduce recidivism. SRR responds to this problem by guiding departments of corrections to focus on 4 key areas, which we call the 4 pillars of SRR. These 4 pillars were developed based on the successes, challenges, and lessons we have learned from you, the people in the field, who are carrying this work out day to day. So the first pillar is workforce development. System-wide change requires transformation of workforce. Messaging recidivism reduction goals must be a priority from leadership. This starts during the planning grant, but should also strategically be the focus in the first year of implementation as well. Focusing on organizational development in the first year of the grant mitigates the change management that has to occur in the subsequent years. This pillar also involves training a workforce in proven evidence-based practices that are designed to increase the participant success. 2, the second pillar, focus on the people who are most likely to recidivate based on risk and needs assessments, and use that information to determine the type and intensity of programs and supervision that should be provided to them. Provide appropriate services and treatment that also draw on the evidence-based approaches and ensure high-quality service delivery. The third pillar, continuous quality improvement. So to ensure that activities are implemented with fidelity to evidence-based practices, grantees should plan continuous quality assurance checks and position themselves to respond to the results of those checks. Corrective action can be taken to address and identify shortcomings or impediments. And then the fourth pillar, engaging in an action research model to provide ongoing data analysis and identify active process for course correction. The action research component of the SRR process helps policymakers, practitioners, and the researchers promote quality assurance, track performance indicators including recidivism, and ensure that there's a continuous communication and reinforcement of positive changes among staff. This requires taking a data-driven approach to tracking progress and having a strong evaluation component to the implementation. So based on the previous slide, we wanted to hear from you what you're thinking in your state has the greatest need. Out of these 4 pillars, please choose an answer on the right side of your screen. Okay, thanks everybody. Keisha will close the poll, and it'll take a couple seconds here to tally the results. Okay, thanks everybody. It seems the majority of responses are in workforce development. That's interesting to see. Great. All right, now I'll turn the presentation over to Deanna Hopkins at BJA.
Thank you, Andrea. I want to kind of go over about eligible applicants for this application. First, it's important to outline who is eligible to apply for this grant. This applicant must be a state correctional agency, which could be a state Department of Corrections, a state community corrections, or a state administering agency. We also want to note that individuals who were awarded the SRR grant in FY15 are not eligible to apply on this round this year. So a lot of times we want to find out about federal funds awarded under this program and what they can cover and what they cannot cover. So federal funds awarded under this program may not cover more than 50% of the total cost of the project. Applicants must identify the source of the 50% non-federal portion of the total project cost and how they will use the matched funds. The recipient of a grant must provide a minimum of 25% of the total project cost in cash match, and 25% of the total project cost may be matched by making in-kind contributions of goods or services that are directly related to the purpose for which the grant was awarded. Federal funds received and cash match provided by the grantee shall be used to supplement, not supplant, non-federal funds that would otherwise be available for the activities funded under this section. Match waiver. To be considered for a match waiver, a letter of request signed by the authoritative representative of the agency must be submitted with the application defining the financial hardship. For additional information on the match, please look at page 11 and 12 of the solicitation. And if you have any questions about any other requirements of the solicitation, please see the link at the end of this webinar. So how do you apply? System of Award Management, and we call it SAM for short. There's a registration and renewal, and it can take as long as 10 business days to complete. So we definitely encourage people to go in and register ahead of time before the application is due. OJP recommends, again, that you register as early as possible within the SAMS process because of the 10 business days it takes to get completed. OJP urges each applicant to submit his application at least 72 hours prior to the application due date to allow time to receive validation messages or rejection notifications and be able to respond and correct any problems that your application may have. Applications must be successfully submitted through grants.gov by 11:59 p.m. Eastern Time on July 6, 2017. Statement of the problem. So when we're looking at the application and what should the application include, statement of the problem or the description of the issue. That's defining the scope of the problem within your jurisdiction or within your agency that you're going to address. Provide clear statewide definitions of recidivism. Explain how the rate is calculated, tracked, and reported to policymakers. Describe the state's recidivism reduction strategy to date. What has been going on to date? Describe the state's current ability to target supervision and resources consistent with individuals' risk and need level. Describe the state's current ability to ensure supervision and service quality, consistency, timing, and dosage are appropriate. Describe the geographic area to which the highest concentration of released prisoners return. Your project design and implementation. Clearly articulate the recidivism reduction goal for this project, and I'll highlight clearly state the reduction goal for this project. Describe the data sets to be assessed during the planning period. Address the planning and capacity building criteria, and you can see that on page 7 and 9 of the solicitation. Present a statewide strategic planning process. Include development of measurable, ambitious but realistic goal for reducing recidivism, include recommended changes in policies and practice, and a work plan to implement and build statewide support for those changes. Describe how a target population will be identified for service delivery, and describe how services will be delivered. Address all of the second chance mandatory requirements, which you will be able to find on page 5 and 7 of the solicitation. For capabilities and competencies, which is 25% of your grant and how it's scored, describe the management structure and staffing of the project. Identify the agencies responsible for the project and the project coordinator. Demonstrate the executive leadership's commitment to the development and adherence to a statewide recidivism reduction plan. And that is making sure that whoever is the executive leadership, whether if you're a Department of Corrections, is it your commissioner, if you're a state administering agency, the leadership of that agency, and some states even have the governor sign off on it. Demonstrate the commitment and capability of the implementing agency and collaborative partners to implement the project, including gathering and analyzing information, developing a plan, and evaluating the program. Plan for collecting data, which is very huge and has to be thought of in the process of, are you going to be able to collect the data that is necessary to provide the information that is needed at the end? Required for the solicitation performance measures, describe the process of assessing the project's effectiveness. How are you going to measure what you're going to do? Through the collection and reporting of the required performance metrics data. Again, that's on page 17 of the solicitation, and it talks about your reentry strategic plan description, your reentry strategic plan status, data collection plan status, reentry task force composition, reentry population, anticipated capacity, risk and needs assessment, baseline recidivism rate reduction. The next part that is very important to take a look at is your budget. Is it complete, cost-effective, and allowable? Remember, 50% match is required and possible to get a match waiver. Indirect cost rate agreement, make sure it is included. If it is a tribe, the tribal authorizing resolution needs to be included within the budget. And financial management and systems of internal controls, there is a questionnaire that has to be completed when you submit your budget within your grant application. Other material to be included with your application, letter from the applicant's agency executive, that is again your Department of Corrections, commissioner, governor, department head of the entity, the state entity that is applying. The project timeline. What is the timeline that you're expecting to get things done? Within the first 30 days of being awarded the grant, what will be the activities that will be completed moving on? Position descriptions and resumes of the staff that will be working on the project. Letters of support. If you're working with other collaborative agencies to address this issue and build this plan out, having them provide letters of support or memorandums of agreements. A good one to have here is your research partner. If you're going to be working with a research partner, having a memorandum of agreement at your application is a good idea to have that relationship sealed. Applicant disclosure of pending applications. If you have any pending applications within the federal government, we ask that you share that information and complete that form. Research and evaluation, independence and integrity. Disclosure of process related to executive compensation. There is a part in the grant that talks about the total amount that executive compensation cannot be over, and you just fill that out and make sure that that is included. Request and justification for employee compensation. If there is an individual in your entity that is making more in salary than that disclosure talks about, you then have to complete a request and justification for that employee's salary. So there are 11 mandatory requirements that have to be included for second chance funding. These requirements will help define the perimeter of your program and will be useful in completing your planning guide, which will be discussed later. So I'll briefly go over these requirements. Your plan, you must have a reentry strategic plan, and within your plan there must be a measurable annual and 5-year performance outcome that is moving to a 50% reduction in recidivism over that 5-year period. A reentry implementation schedule and sustainability plan. How are you getting to that 50% reduction within your 5-year plan, and what is the sustainability plan to sustain that after that 5 years? Establishment of an ongoing engagement of a reentry task force. Do you have a reentry task force that is meet regularly, subcommittees that are meeting to keep moving the agenda from the reentry strategic plan along, and that you guys are identifying and addressing some of those state barriers, including policies and procedures within Department of Corrections that are causing an issue with reentry? Discussion of the roles and certification of involvement of other agencies and organizations that will join the coordination and collaborative effort. What role are those other agencies playing in the implementation of your state recidivism reduction project? Evidence of collaboration with agencies offering supportive services as well as law enforcement. Is your state Medicaid office offering support to enroll individuals in Medicaid? Is your state child support office having that support and also utilizing those collaborations? Role of corrections and community corrections and letters of support. Again, assuring that they have provided you with a letter of support to attach to your application. Again, the commitment of your chief executive officer, that letter should be included and that you're meeting that requirement. Description of evidence-based methodology and outcome measures used for this evaluation. Explanation of how the project can be broadly replicated. How, if this project is successful in your area in reducing recidivism, how can we replicate it in other areas and jurisdictions? An analysis of statutory, regulatory, rules-based, and practice-based hurdles to reintegration. Again, that includes some of those policies and procedures that are embedded within Department of Corrections practices. How can you take a look at those and see if those are some of the things that need to be addressed? And the final one is always a baseline recidivism rate. What is the recidivism rate in your area? Has it been identified at this point? So at this time, I want to hand it back over to Andrea, and I'll stay on the line in case anyone has any questions about the application process at the end.
Thanks, Deanna, for providing guidance on how folks can submit a successful application. So right now we're going to go to our final polling question, and that is, have you previously applied for a Second Chance Act grant? And that would be yes or no on the right-hand side of your screen. And this is a relatively straightforward question, so we'll close the polls now. And Keisha, if you could give us the results. Okay, it looks like the majority responded with no, they haven't applied for a Second Chance Act grant. Okay, thank you. So now we're briefly going to talk about a couple examples from some of the states and the activities under the current SRR projects in individual states. So for example, the Connecticut Department of Corrections has a strong focus on community supervision and will begin training staff in effective practices for community supervision, or ethics. Nevada Department of Corrections will establish fields in their risk assessment into their management information system to help automate the instrument across the entire state to ensure that employees across the state are speaking the same language about their clients. Arizona Department of Corrections has contracted with Arizona State University to begin training correctional officers in motivational interviewing, and Illinois Department of Corrections implemented their risk assessment into treatment decisions as a result of SRR. Now we'll hear from Renee Sneed from the Georgia Department of Community Supervision, who will speak about some of the activities that were planned and implemented in her state under SRR.
Thank you, Andrea, and thanks for allowing me to share about some of the work that we're doing in Georgia. Criminal justice reform has been a major priority of our governor. In 2013, he initiated a three-phase approach to reform. The first year, we focused on the adult system, the second year, the juvenile system, and then the third year and beyond, we've been working on reentry. And so our initiative is called the Georgia Prisoner Reentry Initiative, and I'll refer to it as GAPRI or as PRI, and it is the cornerstone of the work that we are doing. It's a statewide plan, and we're focusing on case management and service delivery. We start at the beginning with entry into the prison, continue through community supervision, and on into aftercare in the community. We're focusing on returning citizens who are identified as medium to high risk and medium to high need. We used our SRR funds for several projects. We were we had a lot of work that we wanted to do, so we were quite ambitious. We hired community coordinators in 5 pilot sites across the state, and they focus on capacity building, they focus on resource development as well. There is also an evidence-based prison where we're looking at the prison programming, doing a lot of different things with staff training, including ethics and enhanced supervision training, as well as additional counselors were hired by our Department of Corrections, and all of those counselors are clinically trained. We've done work with graduated sanctions and responses. We also have a project where we hired a housing coordinator who is working to expand our housing resources. We've included a component for quality improvement. We actually have a contract as well for some assistance in writing policies and procedures, and of course we also have been working very closely with our active research partner. One of the key components of our SRR project includes capacity building and ensuring that those people who are leaving prison, they have access to community resources. And so we've got the community coordinators, and now we have them in 17 PRI counties. We have in-reach specialists who are housed in the prison facilities, and they also do some work in our transitional centers. And we also have some housing coordinators. And so we've got this huge team that works together to make sure that needs are identified and individuals are connected to resources. And so we realized early on that we had a challenge when we were looking and trying to measure the work of our community coordinators and looking at and trying to determine whether they were actually devoting their time and resources to community needs that were identified and resource gaps that were identified. We had several challenges, and so we began asking some questions like, who are the community coordinators meeting with? What type of progress are they making toward achieving their objectives? And we really wanted to make sure that they were directing their time and the resources, and at the resource gaps that had been identified in their comprehensive plans. We also wanted to know how much support they were providing to individual participants who are in prison or coming out of prison, and how well they were working with our community supervision officers. And so we decided to use some of the SRR funds to build a soft metrics website, and this project was really suggested by our research partner. And he helped us to build a system that incorporates all of our pre-existing community resources and gives us the ability to add additional resources and begin to measure how we are sharing information. And we're looking at how we're sharing information among the community supervision officers, how they're working with the community coordinators, and then how everything ties in with the housing coordinators, in-reach specialists, and all of the staff that we have working across our now 17 pilot sites. To give you a little bit of background, when we started this program, there was no centralized system for collecting any type of data that's related to community resources. And we went through a merger in the middle of this process, and the department that I work for, the agency that I work for, was created to handle probation operations as well as parole operations, and to lead in the state's reentry efforts. And so there was an urgent need to look at data collection with community resources, but our IT department and our technology staff, they were overloaded, and resource tracking just was not a high priority. So once we turned the website on, currently we've got over 100 users, and they include community supervision officers, community coordinators, in-reach specialists who are in our prisons, and we also in central office have access to the site. And we're able to, we have standardized reports, and they're tracking activities and progress, and the in-reach specialists who are housed in the facilities can now go into that site when they're interviewing someone in the prison and they're identifying needs. They're able to immediately pull up that particular county that they're paroling out to and print out a list of providers who are available to meet their needs in their particular community. So it provides a really good resource for our staff who are on the ground doing the day-to-day work, and also provides us with a lot of accountability on the management level as well. And the system has worked so well that we have started to collect data on mentors and mentees, looking at their encounters, the nature of their encounters, the extent of it, how long are they meeting with people, and how often they are meeting with them as well. And so now that we've got thousands, literally thousands of resources in our system, including all types of providers and employers, we realized that it would be impossible to contact all of those resources and to do follow-up. And so we built out the system again with the assistance of our research partner. And so the website now can automatically send emails to our resource contacts, and there's a link in those emails that asks a few questions about, you know, how the program is going, if our staff is responsive, are we appropriate when we're sending participants, is there a good match, are we taking into consideration their capacity limits, and any other information that resource provider wants to give us. And so those responses then are returned to our website. The website will then analyze those results and report it to the community coordinator. So it gives us an opportunity to really do everything that we can do to maintain our relationship with our service providers. The system also sends an alert to our community coordinator if there is a service provider who has not been contacted in a while, especially when they are trying to build a new relationship with that provider. Currently, as we move forward, we're looking at doing something similar with those surveys with our faith-based organizations. We've implemented healing communities, and so we're going to do the same thing with those contacts and the mentors who are working with the faith-based organizations. And then from there, we'll implement it outside of our pilot sites, and it will be statewide, And I think the last thing, or the conversations are already occurring and trying to determine how we can actually do something similar with our Department of Juvenile Justice. And so we'll be able to have a system statewide that includes multiple agencies that are actually able to take advantage of the soft metric site. And so that's one of the projects that we're working on, and it's really been extremely useful in tying together all of the work that is happening out in the field. And so if anyone has any questions at the end for the Q&A, I will also be on the line as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Renee, and thanks for staying on the line for the Q&A at the end. It's definitely impressive to hear all of the stuff that's happening in Georgia, so thanks for sharing. Right now we're going to talk briefly about planning and capacity building. The process for developing the strategic plan is guided by the Planning and Implementation Guide, which is provided by BJ's technical assistance provider, the National Reentry Resource Center. This guide will help ensure the grantees meet the requirements for planning and capacity building. As mentioned on the previous slide, if awarded Phase 1 funds, you'll be required to complete this planning guide, which is on the screen here. The guide is divided into 4 sections, each with important content and required exercises. These exercises are built on evidence-based principles and emerging practices. You'll be prompted to write short responses, attach relevant documents, and complete the exercises. Your answers will provide insight into your program's strengths and identify areas for improvement. As Kerwin mentioned earlier in the presentation, that the TA is provided by the National Reentry Resource Center, and the NRC distributes monthly electronic newsletters containing the latest research and news in reentry, as well as funding opportunities and trainings in the field. When you have a second, please take a moment to look at the website online and subscribe to our newsletter. And now I'm going to hand the presentation over to Kerwin to talk us through some of the questions and answers.
Thanks, Andrea. Before we begin the question and answer session, I want to point out the BJ's contact info for assistance in submitting an application. If any of you all have questions after today's session, feel free to call the grants.gov customer support hotline at the numbers listed, or you can email them at supports@grants.gov, and they should be able to help walk you through any of the questions you may have about applying for the FY17 SR solicitation. So we'll start off with the question and answer session. So far we've had 2 questions come in. The first question we had come in was from Mr. Brian Johnson, and he asked, we are a new coalition from one county in New Mexico. If I understand, we are not eligible to apply for this type of grant because we're not representing the entire state. Is that correct? Deanna,
you would need, take that question? Yes, I will. So the state agency will have to be the applicant. You can partner with your state agency, and they may focus if you are in the jurisdiction that has the highest number of returning individuals for them. You can definitely partner, and they can focus on that jurisdiction, but definitely you will have to get with your State Department of Corrections, your State Administering Agency, to see if they're willing to apply and partner with you on that grant opportunity.
Thanks, Deanna. Next question we have is, can consolidating multiple reentry strategic plans be used to fulfill the requirement of a 5-year plan? Deanna, if you want to take that one again.
What was the question again? I'm sorry, Carmen.
Can consolidating multiple reentry strategic plans be used to fulfill the requirement of a 5-year plan?
I guess you will have to take a look at how old are the plans you're trying to consolidate, and if they're within the last 5 years and you're bringing them together and they were 1-year strategy plans, that could be something to be considered. But also some of the funding can be utilized to enhance your strategic plan as well, but you have to have one on the table that you've been working on.
Well, thank you, Deanna. Got 2 more questions that have come in, so a 2-part question rather. The first question, is there a webinar for nonprofit version of this grant? And then the follow-up is, it appears that this grant is not designed for a national program. Is that correct? Andrew, if you want to give a crack at it, or Mary, or Deanna, or anyone.
Well, I'll address it really quick, and you guys can follow up. When we're focusing on recidivism reduction, we're not focusing on recidivism reduction nationally, because each state has their own issues and barriers and gaps that they need to address specifically, so it would not be feasible for us to do a national program that covers one grant. It definitely should be up to the jurisdictions where over-incarceration and some of those barriers occur. As far as the nonprofit version, we do have nonprofit funding. It's our community reentry program for mentors. And the NRRC, the individuals on the line, Mary or someone, can talk more about that and the due date of when that comes out and hits the community.
Thanks for that, Deanna. We'll get back to the dates on that other solicitation. So.
Okay.
For everyone else on, we have to give a couple more minutes for additional questions.
Curran, I would like to follow up, because I think that's the nonprofit question and eligible applicants for our grant funding. I think it's also we should share information that while we may be focusing on the criminal justice population and Department of Justice has second chance funding, our other federal partners also have funding opportunities that go out to the community. So within the federal government, the USDA has funding resources that they're focusing on this population to get them into certain job categories that's open to nonprofit. Our Office of Victim Services, VOCA, they actually have some funding opportunities available right now. Our HHS, Health and Human Services, has some funding opportunities. Department of Labor. So I know everybody focuses for the criminal justice population within the Department of Justice, but again, we only have one of our grant opportunities that go out to community-based and nonprofits, whereas our other federal partners have funding opportunities as well, and they do not get enough applications, and they've been asking us to help them outreach to this population, to this community, to start looking at some of their grant opportunities.
All right, well, thank you for that, Deanna. Thank you for that information. I hope that helps clarify some things for people that may have had that similar question. So. And
folks, we're taking a minute to look up when that community solicitation will be closing to give you that information. But if you have other questions specifically about other grants for nonprofits, you can feel free to reach out to us here too, and we can give you some more specific information on those grants and let you know when those webinars are and things, and point you to those resources on our website.
Deanna, someone asked if you could repeat some of the other agencies that are offering some of those grants.
And actually, yes, I'm sorry. So we have the USDA, but also if you go to the National Reentry Resource Center's website and look up the Federal Interagency Reentry Council, and it has a list of all the agencies that sit on that Federal Reentry Council, and you can look within those agencies. But a few that I know offhand are USDA, the Office of Child Support that is within HHS, Health and Human Services, Department of Labor, and the Office of Victim Services, VOCA.
Thank you. Well, we'll go ahead and wrap up the webinar today. I want to thank everyone that was in attendance today for attending. I hope we were able to answer a lot of your questions for those of you who have either started to complete your applications or will complete your applications. I thank you for being in attendance. I'd like to give a special thanks to Deanna from BJA, Renee Sneed from the Georgia Department of Community Supervision, Keisha Thornton at CSG, as well as Andrea and Mary. So this concludes today's webinar, and thank you again.